Hello, my name is XPLovecat, and welcome to the first video in a series of videos I'm making on being a first-time Game Master or Keeper. Now, a Game Master or a GM is a generic term for someone who organizes a tabletop role-playing game, or an RPG. GM is a pretty generic term for this type of person, but you may have heard terms like Dungeon Master, which is generally specific to Dungeons and Dragons, or a Keeper, which is specific to the Call of Cthulhu RPG. Now, throughout this series of videos, I'm going to be mostly referring to the Call of Cthulhu RPG and within the context of that system. However, a lot of the advice that you're going to hear is going to be applicable to many different RPG systems. Let's jump into the very first place that GMs have to start, which is choosing a system and deciding which one is right for you. Are you feeling down because there's just too many cool role-playing games to choose from and you can't decide which one to play? Well, worry no more. XPLovecat is here. There are a ton of factors to consider when you're thinking about choosing an RPG system, like setting, tone, accessibility, how much does it cost? Is the system complex or pretty simple to pick up? Or is it combat-driven, story-driven? It'll take a bit of research, but once you narrow down your list to a few RPGs you're interested in, I would recommend going through these factors a little bit more in detail to determine the right system for you. So let's use a real-life example and say you're interested in Call of Cthulhu. I want to go through in depth these factors and see where that RPG traditionally lies on the scale for each of these, and get you thinking about what sort of questions you should ask before choosing a system. And make sure to stick around because at the end I'm sharing my number one rule for choosing an RPG system. The Call of Cthulhu RPG is named after one of H.P. Lovecraft's most famous stories, Call of Cthulhu. Now, this RPG is generally, but not always, played in 1920s America. Investigators confront cults, monsters, other cosmic beings, all while finding out horrifying truths about our world. Which kind of leads into the next factor, which is tone. The atmosphere tends to be creepy, full of tension, and more on the serious side. Not to say there aren't moments of light, but in general, it's intense and horrifying. So the next factor is accessibility. I like to think about how easy it's going to be for me to find the books, find resources, pre-written material, or other advice on the system that I plan to use. So Call of Cthulhu is a very popular RPG system, so there's a ton of resources out there, lots of videos and advice for this system. So overall, it's very accessible. Another important factor is the cost of an RPG system. Now, besides the dice that you normally need to play, the cost can range pretty drastically depending on the system that you pick and how many different books you would need to have the rules for each of your different players. So here's the good news. In order to play the Call of Cthulhu RPG, you only need one book, and that is the Keeper's Rulebook. It's listed on Chaosium's website for only $55, and that's all you need to get started. There is also an optional investigator's handbook, which goes deeper into character creation and the setting of 1920s, but this is optional and it's not needed to start off a campaign in Call of Cthulhu. The additional cost you might incur would be from any pre-made scenarios that you wanted to purchase, but generally these are pretty low priced. Let's talk about complexity next. So within RPG systems, there's a pretty large range between how rules heavy a system is versus how quick it is to pick up. Now, Call of Cthulhu is pretty rules light and the barrier to entry is relatively low. It's basically a core set of rules, and once you have that core set of rules down, there's not too much else that you have to worry about. In addition, the rules can be a little bit fluffy, so there is some wiggle room for the keeper. How long is it going to take me to level my character outside of the session? Because I'm doing like 20 other RPGs, and I have a full-time job, and I sometimes clean my house, so I'm really busy. Great question. So Call of Cthulhu is actually really great for people who have busy lives because once the initial character creation is done, there's no time commitment outside for the investigators when they're playing in between sessions. So at the end of the session, you have about a couple of minutes for the players to increase some of their stats potentially, and then that's it. You're done. They go home. They don't have to worry about anything else until they come back next week or a couple of weeks afterward and keep playing. Overall, for the keeper, it's relatively light in terms of rules, and then on the player side, it's also light in terms of commitment outside of the regular session. The final factor I want to talk about is if the system is focused more on combat or telling a story. So this is really up to what intrigues your players more or what keeps them more entertained. But in general, systems are created in such a way that it favors one or the other. In particular, Call of Cthulhu is much more based on role-playing, which lends itself to telling a story more, and less focus on smashy all the time. Don't worry, you can keep that. There is still combat in Call of Cthulhu, it just might not happen as frequently as you expect it to, or play out in the same way as other systems. Unlike in D&D, where it's focused on adventure and killing enemies, the system is specifically supporting that type of play, including the leveling system and the rules in the game. Whereas Call of Cthulhu might not be as clear-cut in the combat scenarios. So now that we've gone through all these factors with Call of Cthulhu, you have a better idea of if this system is right for you and your players. And if you're still in doubt, there is a free set of quick start rules on Chaosium's website, which I will link in the description below. And now I'm going to throw away most of what I just said and tell you a little bit of a secret. RPGs are variable and can be adapted to the way you and your party likes to play. So the criteria I went through was for traditional Call of Cthulhu. But if you don't like how that plays all the time, and you have a GM that's willing to tweak it a little bit, it can be changed so that it's the way you guys like to play. For example, let's say you're playing D&D and you love that leveling system, but you really want a Lovecraft theme. Then all you have to do is add those Lovecraft monsters in there and change the setting a little bit. I mean, look at this beholder, it's basically Lovecraftian anyway. And let's say you're playing Call of Cthulhu and your investigators are getting a little bit bored with all that investigation. Then switch it up and throw in some more combat. Just scale down the monsters and you're good to go. And you don't want to play in America's 1920s, then don't. Change the setting to some other time period and you can have fun with that too. There are tons of ways to change up the way that you're playing an RPG. And the way the rules were written is just a base and a starting point for you and your group. But when deciding on the initial system and you just can't decide, there's one rule, the absolute essence of RPGs, that I will keep using over and over again. And that rule is everyone at the table should be having fun. So what that means in the simplest terms for choosing an RPG system is choose the one that most excites you and your group. Try it out, change it up, and adapt it to the way that your group likes to play. Thanks for joining me in the first part of the series of New GM and Keeper Guide. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you know when the next video comes out in this series. I'll talk about doing some research, prepping the table, and all the way through running your first session. Thanks for watching. Bye.